Уважаемые дамы и господа, свою работу начинает сессия «Нужно ли Китаю глобальное лидерство?». Dear ladies and gentlemen, we're starting the third panel discussion «Does China need the global leadership?». Пожалуйста, займите свои места в зале. Please take your seats. На сцену приглашаются модератор сессии, ректор МГИМО МИД России, академик Российской академии наук, профессор Анатолий Таркунов, председатель Центра международной безопасности и стратегии Университета Циньхуа Фу Ин, директор Института Киссинджера по Китаю и США при Международном научном центре Вудро Вильсона Роберт Даллей, генеральный директор Японского института международных отношений Томико Ичикава, директор Института современных международных отношений Университета Циньхуа Янь Сюэтун, директор Стокгольмского международного института исследований проблем мира, Швеция, Дэн Смит, заместитель директора по научной работе и меморан, профессор Российской академии наук Александр Ломанов. Please welcome on the stage moderator, rector of MGIMO University, full member of Russian Academy of Sciences, Professor Anatoly Torkunov, Chair of the Center for International Security and Strategy, Tsinghua University, Fu Yin, Director of the Wilson Center's Kissinger Institute on China and the United States, Robert Daley, Director General of the Japan Institute of International Affairs, Tomiko Ichikawa, Director of the Institute of International Studies, Tsinghua University, Yang Xuetun, Director of Stockholm International Peace Research Institute, Dan Smith, Deputy Director for Scientific Work of the Primakov Institute of World Economy and International Relations, Professor Alexander Lomanov.
Friends, participants of Primakov readings, as this session, the upcoming session, since I'm dealing with the East for so many years, been studying East, and so the question is kind of provocative. Does China need the global leadership? It's a provoking question, so we keep asking ourselves, and we put these questions to our Chinese colleagues, or we ask these questions. We ask everybody this question, but there are the objective reasons. That's what determines whether China needs the global leadership or not. So then we can say that starting from 2003. When the new slogan of peaceful rise of China towards leadership, and since that time, so then China has been following the path to the global leadership, and there are many. There is a lot of proof of that. So there's more than 26% of the global economy. China is 23%, even more of new technologies, etc. China is a modern army which is finishing its full modernization, so 3 years ahead of schedule. China is the country which takes very serious steps to protect itself from different sanctions because of its we can use example. You can even refer to it as the opposition, as the face-off between China and the United States, and the policy of double circulation is expanding the internal market, consumption in the internal market, opening to the outside world. So these goals are quite efficient and effective, and as we can testify to that in recent years. And then if we talk about the state of the society and the state of the ideas ruling the world, so headed by the Communist Party of China, so then the ideas promoted by the present leader of China and formulated by previous leaders vis-à-vis international relations, so then the fate of the mankind. I remember the visit of the chairman of Xi Jinping and visited MGIMO, so visited recently, and I talked to him for a long time, and I remember that he formulated a number of very interesting ideas, which continue to evolve, and during the discussions, the different forums, Chinese fora, and the idea of creating international relations of a new type, so the core of which is mutually beneficial relationship, win-win, and so then moral self-perception, so which could be a part of the contribution of Chinese wisdom and contribution to the world logic, and creating this new atmosphere of relations. And so sometimes they go back to the wisdoms of their wise men, and so they speak with the wisdoms of their wonderful scientists. But China is facing a great deal of opposition on the part of the United States because the trade war is worsening, and so then. So they remind this trap of Subhidid, and discussing the subject of possible exacerbation of relations with the United States on many issues, and it's related to Taiwan, and it has to do with other questions, maritime communications, lots of problems and points of division. And now the China-U.S. relations, this opposition between China and the United States is one of the pivotal components that determine the development of international relations globally. And the main trends, very important trends. And I think that now, with our illustrious, prominent specialists in this area, so we'll be able to touch upon this issue and discuss it in depth. And I'd like to ask Mr. Fu Yin to give us his vision of China-U.S. relations. And is it possible to implement the slogan that Xi Jinping came with about new partnership of big, great countries? So this slogan, may it work or not? Is it doable? And today, so then the ability of building such relations, I can't see that happening right now. It's quite difficult too. Please, Mrs. Fu Yin.
Thank you very much. I want to thank the chair for elaborating on the issues. And I feel honored first to be invited to join all of you today. Let me share with you 3 points. And I could see there are other Chinese colleagues. If I miss some of the questions raised, I'm sure they can fill in with richer ideas. First point, how do we look at the global leadership? The conventional wisdom believes that where there exists a world leadership, which helps the world to maintain order and avoid chaos. I'm glad the chair mentioned that the subject for this discussion is provocative, because when I discussed with my group about the topic when we were preparing for this forum, we debated about exactly what does the question mean. Does it mean whether China needs a world leadership, or does it mean that China wants to play a world leadership role? Maybe now I understand that the chair wants both questions. When talking about so the first point is about how do we look at the global leadership. When talking about global leadership, scholars of strategy studies tend to equate it with American hegemony. Indeed, the U.S., backed by its military alliance system as well as world economic dominance, has claimed a world leadership position since the end of the Cold War and has obviously benefited tremendously from it. But the recent years have witnessed the weakening of American leadership. The U.S. has waged a series of wars which consumed huge resources, and its attempt to globalize American democratic system were not always successful. Now feeling exhausted in the world affairs, U.S. has to shrink its ambition and recuperate from overstretched power. In the meantime, the world is confronting increased global challenges, and the lack of global leadership is taking a toll. The fact that the world failed to work together against the pandemic is very disappointing. I was told that I have my voice has an echo. Is it? I don't know what to. It's okay.
No, we can hear you well. We can hear you well. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you. So the second point is what kind of global leadership do we need? Since the end of the Cold War, we in China saw the main trend of the world shifting towards peace and development. And economic globalization became the central motivating strength of the world's growth. In the meantime, global challenges are more complex, and it became very difficult for any single country or a few countries to dominate the global affairs. So if we are going to have a reshaped world leadership, global leadership, it should be based on multilateralism, including major countries taking responsibilities and working together. We prefer not to view global leadership in terms of a hegemonistic perspective. Ideally speaking, global leadership should be centered on the United Nations in compliance with commonly recognized rules and norms. It should be able to coordinate cooperation among countries and international institutions. Global leadership should facilitate the united response of the international community to global challenges and allow equal participation by countries. As a latecomer on the world stage, China lacks global leadership experience, that's obvious. But as a country which has successfully achieved development, China is expected to play a greater role in the world. The Chinese President Xi Jinping proposed the idea, as was mentioned by the chair, the idea of a community with a shared future for mankind. He also said that major countries should fulfill their responsibilities commensurate with their status. China is learning and trying to offer new international public goods. It's also making an effort to improve its ability to participate in global governance. The Belt and Road Initiative and Asia Infrastructure Investment Bank are examples of such effort. China is willing also to work with the countries of the region on security matters, which is exemplified by cooperation in Shanghai Cooperation Organization. The third point, China-US should avoid zero-sum competition. One uncertainty in the world stage is changes in U.S. foreign policy and its policy towards China in particular. As an exhausted hegemonistic power, the U.S. is very reluctant to lose its status as a global leader. Looking at its history, the U.S. is quite experienced in creating strategic rivalries. Now China has become its next target to stimulate its own sense of crisis in maintaining hegemonistic power. The Biden administration is determined to launch a long-term strategic competition with China, which, as he described, would be very fierce. China has no intention of getting involved in such strategic competition, which is based on zero-sum thinking and could eventually lead to a new Cold War or even direct conflict. However, we do not want to shy away from the existing competition in areas of science and technology, for example, and economic affairs. But we hope such competition can be kept in a healthy manner, where both sides can make progress and benefit, and the world can benefit from that. Observing the policy orientation of Washington, we can see that the United States focuses on stimulating domestic reform and resolving internal problems. Its China policy serves the fundamental purpose of preventing China from advancing and taking over. The U.S. is stepping up administrative and legislative moves to formulate a comprehensive policy for competition with China in all fronts. So it seems that China has little choice but to face the competition challenge waged by the United States. In my opinion, the key to secure a strong position in such a competition is to get our own business straight. China has taken the lead in controlling the COVID-19 pandemic and returned to the fast track of economic development. China is now deepening reform according to the objectives set out in the 14th five-year plan, as well as goals for peaking carbon emission, carbon neutrality, which is about to be full of new vitality for China's economic development. And we're not interested in exporting our own ideology and political system. But we are aware that the competition also is a contest about which country can better perform and better maintain stability and stimulate the solidarity and creativity of its people. Also know that such healthy competition should not exclude cooperation. In fields where cooperation is necessary and possible, such as trade and economics and regional hot issues, climate change and nuclear non-proliferation, etc., China still needs to coordinate and cooperate with the U.S. As a comprehensive strategic cooperative partners, China and Russia just celebrated the 20th anniversary of the China-Russia Treaty of Good Neighborliness and Friendly Cooperation. So in the coming years, we still have much space for cooperation, including joining hands to be the backbone of a new global leadership. Thank you for your attention.
Спасибо большое, профессор Фуин.
Thank you very much, Professor Fuin, for wonderful insights and your considerations. Thank you. So then the question that I wanted to raise, meaning will this opposition, U.S. and China opposition, so then even back in 2013, China offered to the United States a new type of cooperation between big states. And that was back in 2013. And then I would like to ask Robert Daly to to comment on that. So when Xi Jinping spoke about offering a new area of cooperation of the big states.
Well, thank you very much to the Krikov readings. It's very good to be back. This is my fourth visit with all of you. I wish that I could be there in person. I miss my travel to both Russia and China. And I look forward to the day that we can all get together in person. I'm actually pretty tired of my library. I'd like to see all of you. You started by asking about the new model of great power relations that China put forward in 2013. I'll briefly answer your question because I think that this debate largely ended in the United States in 2013 and 2014. The proposal was seen by most Americans as vague to the point of uselessness, as merely consisting of things like win-win cooperation, no conflict, no confrontation, and another series of really untestable and unoperationalizable precepts that were designed to paper over what was already a largely competitive relationship. And so it was rejected. While it was rejected, as a slogan, the new model of great power relations. That doesn't mean that we reject the quest for peaceful relations. It doesn't mean that we reject the notion that China's rise is a transformative development that the entire global community needs to make adjustments to. I think that remains the case. But we rejected the slogan. America doesn't proceed in its relations with other great countries under slogans. It's a style problem. So when I looked at the title of this panel, I began exactly where Madame Ying began, which is what does the question mean? How should we interpret it? And my own interpretation of it was to ask it this way. Does China need to pursue a leading role in international affairs? Not the leading role, but a leading role. I agree that we are headed toward a more multilateral system. I think that is a desirable thing. And so I think that the right way to ask it is whether China needs, whether it is legitimate for China to pursue a leading role. And if this is the correct way to interpret the question, then the answer is yes. Let's look at the history of China's quest for leadership. China decided to emerge from its isolation and engage the world in the 1970s because China was determined to improve the lives of its people, to develop. And China's development required foreign talent, foreign capital, and foreign technology in those days, as Deng Xiaoping acknowledged. China's development required the import of natural resources, food, and energy. It required for China access to foreign markets, and it required China's participation in global knowledge systems, innovation systems, and financial systems. Development, above all, came to require China's inclusion in global supply chains. So with all of this global connectivity, and thanks to the hard work of the Chinese people, China's economic development was a phenomenal success. And as it succeeded, China inevitably developed interests overseas and the capacity to pursue and defend those interests. Its overseas interests were, broadly speaking, in the early days of Chinese development, similar to those of most globally integrated nations. And these interests, China's overseas interests, compelled China to study existing global systems and then to try to shape those systems to better suit China's needs. That is to say that China did, require a leadership role in the world. China's interest in finding a leadership role in international affairs was, I would say, again, broadly speaking, natural, and therefore can reasonably be described as a need. So the answer to this panel's question, if I've interpreted it correctly, is yes. China needs to find a way to have a leading role in international affairs. But I've been speaking of China so far as though it were just any hypothetical, successful large nation. And I've been speaking of China as though it had risen in a somewhat idealized world. In an idealized world, if a large country develops faster than any in human history, and if it does so largely peacefully, and if it helps to enrich other countries, as China has, we might expect other nations to acclimate to and even accept that country's ideas for global governance. So the question is, why has China's quest for political influence met with so much resistance? If China needs to pursue a leading role in international affairs, as I think we've established that it does, why is it so often criticized for doing so? Why did Europe transition from openness to an EU-China comprehensive agreement on investment to freezing all discussion of the issue within a single season? Why did Italy walk back its support for BRI? Why did England abandon its golden era of relations with China? Why did Lithuania withdraw from the 17+1? Why are thousands of young Hungarians protesting the establishment of a Fudan University campus in their country? A 2020 Pew survey of 14 advanced economies in Asia, Europe, and North America found that a majority of people in each of those countries had an unfavorable opinion of China, and in Australia, the UK, Germany, the Netherlands, Sweden, the US, South Korea, Spain, and Canada, negative views had at that time reached their highest point in a decade. A Pew poll conducted in 6 Asia-Pacific nations between May and September of 2019 revealed strongly negative views of China and wariness of partnership with China, despite the largely negative views of President Donald Trump. This was a period in which the soft power of both China and the United States suffered greatly. So why is there such strong resistance to Chinese political influence in the developed and democratic world? Most of which cheered on, contributed to, and benefited from China's economic development. China's usual answer, which we just heard in part, is that the United States, which fears its own decline and loss of hegemony, is turning other countries against China's peaceful rise based on an incorrect interpretation of China's goals and power. I find this argument extremely unconvincing. Countries base their policies on their own interests, not on American pressure. In fact, most countries actively oppose any overt American effort to influence their views. America itself is so deeply divided at present that no White House, Democratic or Republican, can persuade even a reliable majority of Americans to hold any one opinion for very long, let alone convince citizens of other countries to support American positions. You need only look at American failure in Cuba over the past 70 years to realize that Washington cannot tell people in other countries what to believe. So I don't think we can blame the growing opposition to Chinese global governance on the West. Obviously, fears of decline, fear of the unknown, and domestic factors do contribute to many countries' attitude toward Chinese global influence. But I believe the primary spur to international distrust of China is the way China exercises power within its own borders. It is Beijing's behavior, not Western fears or an incorrect understanding of China, that is the greatest obstacle China faces to its efforts to contribute more to multilateral global governance. Put simply, people in much of the rest of the world simply don't wish to be ruled as people in China are ruled. No matter how much they admire China's economic success, its traditional culture, and the work of their many Chinese friends. So this is the part of my remarks where you might expect me to give the usual litany of complaints against China to prove my point, but I don't think that's necessary. We all know what that list is about. Suffice it to say that because the global system comprises a variety of sovereign nations with different interests and roughly equal rights to make their interests known, global policy debates, global governance is inherently, if imperfectly, democratic in its form. The form of global governance itself is largely democratic. Policy discussions in global fora are uncensored and fairly transparent. Civil society organizations contribute vigorously and openly to policy formulation. Worldwide media cover global debates freely and critically. So the democratic debate, transparency, civil society participation, and free media coverage and public discussion that largely characterize global rulemaking are not features of the Chinese system. This is one of the reasons China is having such difficulty acclimating. China has difficulty participating in democratic governance globally when it does not practice democratic governance at home. And it can't take one attitude internationally and another domestically, sort of the neiji and waisong, as they say in China, because the Chinese people would know about it. They're too connected. So, in closing, what can China do when its need for a greater role in global governance is legitimate, but its mode of governance is widely viewed as illegitimate or at least undesirable beyond China's borders? Xi Jinping has recently addressed this in calling on Chinese media and other aspects of Chinese society to create a more lovable image of China, to tell China's stories better, to make it more lovable. I suggest that this is unlikely to succeed. America does have tremendous discourse power, but I don't think it's because America is lovable. The rest of the world sees an America that is lovable and unlovable. Sometimes America can look horrifically unlovable. The world sees the whole thing, the whole American circus and the entire American mess, as well as American successes, and then the world makes up its own mind. So I don't think this campaign to convince the rest of the world that China is lovable will succeed. I do think that true openness and transparency in China would help China bridge the gulf between its understandable desire to play a leading role in global governance and the world's doubts about its ambitions. I think that an open China, a transparent China, rather than a lovable China, would help lead to the kinds of multipolarity that I suspect many people at the Primakov readings would support. Thank you.
Спасибо большое, Роберт.
Well, regarding motivation and the reasons for many countries' activities, well, probably it's not exactly the concern of a high role of China in global governance. I believe individual motivation is valid for many countries, and actually I heard many times from the Chinese leaders, they don't export their model. It's not their wish to export their model overseas. I would like to ask Alexander Lomanov, who has been working with the modern Chinese ideology and the framework and public structure, to comment on what Robert has been saying. I believe it's worth commenting and some deliberation. I just ask you, please, dear panelists, you know that our time is not unlimited, and it's only 50 minutes that we have, so that we could have some time for Q&A and exchange. Please cut your presentations a little bit shorter. I'm sorry, but I have to request you. Thank you. I'll try to tell you about all the key ideas that I wanted to bring to the audience. A couple of days ago, we got from the President Biden an exhaustive answer about the people who exactly creates the rules in this world. I mean, the Washington Post articles that says that together with European allies, they will concentrate on the market democracies, but not China, write the rules of the 21st century for the trade and technologies. So there is no place for China in this structure, and for others either. There is no room in this structure. The problem is that we don't have a kind of answer for China as a global leader, and creating and keeping the global monopoly. So it is kind of parallel leadership that will be the most probable structure. It's important to avoid creating opposite blocks opposing each other. We understand that Chinese colleagues, like we heard, believe that China has successfully blended into the global structure of rules. And I'm quoting the Chinese, and Russia has kind of adjusted 50-50. It's on one hand it's trying to cope, but on the other hand it's ready to oppose, and it's becoming a center of new opposition. So it's a new system, east and west. So this new system, new east-west system, is being born in front of our eyes from the opposition of China and the US, and has many features of the past Cold War. The question is, where do we get a new global leader, just like the United States, strong in every aspect? In the Chinese international exercises about Chinese works, the deliberations about the global leadership, we hear very often that China is strong in economics but weak in military case. But Russia is strong. Russia is a military power, but it's weak in economics. So the United States will do everything to keep Russia economically weak and China weak as a military power for a long time. If the two countries merge their potentials and become an economically and militarily strong conglomerate that will be capable to at least writing its own rules. So in March, Biden said another important thing, that the purpose of China to become a leader, the strongest country of the world, but as Biden said, not under my presidency, because the United States will keep growing. But what if China keeps growing faster than the US? This year, the growth rate is around 8%. And China, grows. Will the Chinese economy be able to sustain such growth rate? That is because it has it's built differently. So it's acute. It's competition. It's a fight for bright ideals. It's a very important and interesting topic, and we need to elucidate it in order to understand where the criticism is constructive and where it's destructive. One of the Chinese experts who lives now someplace else, not in China, confirms that China is for globalization, but for wrong globalization. China insists on wrong global order and authoritarian. China is fragile, has no resources. China will not be able to bypass the US as a global leader, but let's imagine that China has got the resources. Then the panic about Chinese leadership will even become stronger. That's what we mentioned in our discussion today and previous session. The problem of values and basic ideals is basically a problem of the Chinese slogan of the community of human destiny. The most interesting, the first stage, it was translated differently into English. It said, community for common destiny of mankind. It's a clumsy translation, but common destiny for mankind. After that, the interpreters actually invented a new term, shared future community. For the Western English-speaking consumer, it's more attractive rather than, common destiny. But probably the Russian consumers have, strong nerves, and in the Russian translation, those common destiny was adopted immediately. But these were the fineries of Chinese language. But the Chinese language doesn't have the word common. It's just the destiny. And Chinese experts in their publications keep saying that, look, China has already offered the vision of the future, and it's the unity of common destiny, and Russia has not offered anything. And then immediately, certainly, it's not that Russia doesn't have ideas or bright heads. Russia has it, but Russia doesn't have resources. Russia is not attractive. Russia doesn't have potential like China. So this kind of element of, boasting or confidence that China has already approached that red line when it can offer global human ideas among the Chinese expert and the political elite. That's what they think. So what's the basis for criticism for the Chinese slogan of the common destiny? From Chinese point of view, democracy is not better than authoritarian structure. Everyone should coexist peacefully without trying to change others. From the Chinese point of view, it's good, but from the Western point of view, it's unacceptable because democracy and a totalitarian country have nothing in common. So the West proclaims, containment of China and overextending China. But then you cannot expect China to become the source of global goods and benefits. If it's only the West that creates the rules, then no answer is going to be multilateral. Then there was a plan. They came up with a plan. What does China need to do to become a global leader? Clear, build a civil society, change the political system, absorb liberal values. Then there will be no values gap, and then China will get the trust of other countries and get leadership. But how seriously can we consider similar scenarios? China watch the post-Soviet transformation very closely, and radical reform may make China even weaker and poorer. And in this case, the relations will be as warm and nice as Russia 3 decades after the collapse of the USSR. We forgot about it, but it's relevant for the Chinese. They keep reminding, look, Russia abandoned socialism from 30 years ago. So what? Did the West accept you? No, with all your parliamentary power, with all the competitiveness, with all the authorities distribution, you are behind the gate of the liberal house and Western world. You are still, somewhere in the backyard. China, with their civilization and other country, has a chance to enter the European house, much less than Russia. So again, political transformation is a key to entering the global community and making China one of the co-authors of the global rules. The less and less probability of that. Where's the catch? In January, Western Analytics Center published a report named Long Telegram, so moving to the new American strategy of China. It's a remake of Long Telegram of Cannon, but written applicable to China, but not the USSR. No, how you look at it, they immediately drive a wedge. Let's drive the wedge into the Chinese government. There must be someone who opposes Xi Jinping. So let's drive a wedge between opposition and just make opposition race. Let's drive a wedge between the Communist Party of China and the people. Let the people be against the party. Let's drive a wedge between Russia and China. So these perception that the best way is to drive wedging and expanding the crack actually is of concern to everyone. And in this case, the West should not be surprised that China is trying to build obstacles to those wedges. And I shall just remind you, we heard it, but I will remind that this is a very good reminder. In a month's time, approximately, there will be 20 years since signing of the Russian-Chinese agreement about friendship and goodwill. And over the last 20 years, Russia and China has shown that you can be good friends.
We can trust each other, we can develop new ideas and put them into practice. That is why I think that even if the simultaneous constructions can be built and the West will close in upon itself and say, I will be writing the rules. If that happens, Russia and China has a very good history of good relations to write the rules together, discuss them and put them into practice, and jointly enjoy the results of what we will have done. Thank you. Today, the participants of the session touched upon the role that China plays in the South Pacific region. But we all know very well the economic activity of China in this year, so how they work with the ASEAN countries. One way, one belt. It's a gigantic project. It's economic infrastructure. So that has been developing. So a lot of money has been invested. Huge, gigantic. So I would not agree with Robert that many countries of this region who participate in this project, so they feel. They have this feeling of gratitude, let's not say gratitude, but they're very much interested, and they actually participate in the implementation of this huge Chinese project. And it's obvious that certainly there's a great deal of awareness, historic awareness. It's there, so they are wary. They're wary. These countries are wary. That's for sure. Some territorial claims and territorial challenges. That certainly poisons up to a point. So this atmosphere or create some awareness. And so I would like to ask Tomiko Ichikawa to come out with his points. So how does Japan view this movement? How do you view China as the claimant for the global leadership, and how does Japan view China as such? Thank you.
I'm very honored to be invited to this prestigious forum and to be part of this prestigious panel. Actually, many of the points I wished to make were said in various forms by the previous speakers, so I will follow the moderator's instruction to be concise and short. Actually, the first question I wish to raise regarding this panel was the formulation of this question. Does China need the global leadership? And particularly two previous speakers, Madame Fu Yin and Dr. Deli, already tackled this question. Actually, my reformulation of this question was, does China want the global leadership? And if so, what kind of leadership does it want? Well, whatever Chinese intention may be, again, today we see this debate about whether we are heading towards a new Cold War situation because of the US-China confrontation. And some say, and we had it today, we should avoid such categorization. However, I believe the answer to this question will depend more on the actions rather than the rhetoric, while I also recognize the power of narratives. There have been already many things mentioned by my previous speakers in many ways, but I would like to formulate in this way. China, whatever its intentions may be, appears to be expanding or trying to expand its international influence further, while continuing to make its domestic and foreign policies more and more authoritarian and assertive. China also continues its rapid military expansion. We recognize that China contained the COVID-19 infection more rapidly than many Western countries, so it's also leading economic recovery in the region and the world. In light of this, China also seems to be more confident of its governance model. So based on this, it seems and it appears to be kind of expanding its influence through its so-called mask and vaccine diplomacy in addition to the Belt and Road Initiative. So in response or in light of this situation, the perception of China among Western countries, as Dr. Daly quite detailed, including Europeans, has become more guarded and even unfavorable. President Biden already made it clear that the US considered China as its most important competitor. The US also made it clear that it will work with its allies and friends to counter China's influence. In Europe, again, as Dr. Daly just said, the recent decision by the European Parliament on the investment agreement with China may be an indication of further hardening public opinion there. So it is also interesting that Dr. Daly mentioned President Xi Jinping's remarks of last week, because that is another point that I wish to raise and ask maybe question to our Chinese colleagues. According to the press reports, he seemed to have said that China would need to adopt a narrative in its international communication to shape a reliable, admirable, or lovable, and respectable image of China. Does this mean China wishes to make any change to its so-called wolf warrior diplomacy? We are interested to hear what Chinese colleagues' views on this point. However, more importantly, what matters is not so much whether or not the rhetoric will change, but whether or not the actions by China, particularly assertive actions by China, from military and security areas to diplomacy and trade policies that have been seen in recent years, may show any signs of change. Having said this, we in Japan and also US and China and all the nations in the Indo-Pacific region should try to find areas where we have common interest and can work together bilaterally or through regional and multilateral framework. We in the region, many countries just agreed to the new economic framework, RCEP, at the end of last year. So this is an example that cooperation is also ongoing while competition or confrontation, as you call it, are also deepening. And the US and China themselves, and Madame Fu Yin said today again, have already identified areas such as climate change and non-proliferation as areas where they can work together. Tangible progress in these areas can build momentum for cooperation between US and China, but it may not be enough to improve their relation in a fundamental way, as was the case between the US and the Soviet Union during the Cold War. So while we would like to pursue this way of cooperation, we have to hear from our particular US and Chinese colleagues and other colleagues how they see the balance between these two paths. So I will stop here. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. I think that this issue of which is one way or the other is related to your presentation. And so what do you think? Can Russia and China so offer an updated multi-centric system that could work efficiently vis-a-vis global governance? I'd like to ask Mr. Smith to talk about it, but and certainly on top of what you were planning to say. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And like other speakers, let me say how pleased I am to have been invited to speak to this edition of the Primakov readings. My institute, CIPRI, has a very close relationship with IMEMO, which we're very happy with and very proud of. I think that answering your question, we begin by acknowledging, which I think all speakers have implicitly and explicitly, that China is the #1 rising power of our time. That simply is an inescapable fact of the current period, the first 2 decades of the 21st century. China is the #1 trading partner now of more countries than the US is the #1 trading partner of. There are some discussions and arguments to have about the detail of those statistics, but we would not have been having any discussion about a statistic like that 20 years ago. This is a new phenomenon in world affairs, and it's an extremely important one, and it needs to be the starting point of our conversation. I think in different ways, as the Belt and Road Initiative shows, and also the Asia Infrastructure Investment Bank, but also in a different sense, the agreement on climate change that was, or to cooperate about climate change, that was recently reached between the new Biden administration and the government of China show there are many problems that simply cannot be addressed properly, cannot be responded to, challenges that we cannot rise to face unless at least China and the US are rising to face them together. And that, I think, means whether one is thinking from a specifically American perspective, or more from the European Union perspective, or indeed from the perspective of more regional neighbors like Japan and South Korea. The challenge is handling the relationship. The question is not whether to have a relationship with China. The question is not even whether to cooperate with China. On many issues, there is really very little choice. There must be cooperation. But there will also inevitably be competition. And the challenge which I think is being discussed and should also be discussed in China, and I would add ought to be discussed in Russian foreign policy circles as well, amongst the Russian intelligentsia and the policymaking groups, is how to work the balance of cooperation and competition. And that, I think, is where the discussion about a model for global relations should take us. How do these big players work out that balance between cooperation and competition? In the past half decade, I am afraid that we have seen a real anomaly in international affairs, where 3 great powers, the USA, China, and Russia, none of them seem to be committed towards maintaining a status quo, a viable balance. Each was pushing towards their own benefit and their own advantage. I found that very understandable in the case of China, which is the #1 rising power, as I said. I found it also understandable in the case of Russia, where there is a strong feeling of having been so badly dealt with during the 1990s. I found it absolutely paradoxical in the case of the USA, which was objecting to an international system which it had done so much to set up and which it had benefited from in so many ways. But that was the paradox of the Trump era. Now, what I wanted to talk about a little bit is some of the realpolitik reasons that underlie why there must be a relationship and why there will be both elements of cooperation and competition. I think if one thinks about the pandemic or about climate change, about globalization, about economic recovery, about the Belt and Road Initiative, one understands the importance of cooperation. Looking at the hard realpolitik side of this as well, China has to be taken seriously, not just because of its economic weight, but also because of its military weight. China is now the 2nd largest military spender in the world, responsible for 13% of world military spending. That is, by the way, about 1/3 of the American share of world military spending, according to my institute's data. but it is about 4 times Russia's share. It's about 4 times the share of any of the major European military spenders. And Chinese military spending has been increasing every year for the past 26 years. And that cannot be said about any other state in the world. In arms transfers, the international arms trade in major weapons, China is one of the top 5 importers in the world, and it is also one of the top 5 exporters in the world, exporting to actually 51 states, although to most of those on a relatively small scale, the largest market by far is still Pakistan. And then there, of course, are the nuclear weapons, though I think that here the normal discourse, the normal discussion on China's nuclear weapons in the USA and in Western Europe really does exaggerate their significance. Our data suggests China has 350 nuclear warheads at the moment out of a global stockpile in January of this year of 13,080. And none of China's nuclear warheads are actually operationally deployed. They are kept readiness and in a state of readiness and in storage, available to be attached to missiles and put on bombers and so on when necessary. Whereas both the USA and Russia keep respectively 1,800 and over 1,600 nuclear warheads permanently operationally deployed on missiles and on bombers. What this meant when it came to nuclear arms control was that it was really unrealistic to expect that China would join in to a new generation of, or to the extension of the New START agreement, which was between the USA and Russia signed in 2010, came into force in 2011, and was due to expire in February of this year if President Biden had not, at the last moment, extended it. It would have been, I think, close to a disaster if it had not been extended. But the question now is, now that it has been extended for 5 years, how is that 5 years going to be used? And will there simply be more rhetoric coming from a divided US, as Dr. Daly has pointed out? Will there simply be more rhetoric coming about China's expanding nuclear arsenal? And it is growing, but not very fast, and it is way smaller than the US and Russian ones. Will there be rhetoric, or will there be real engagement? Because there is an interesting and important case to be made that China could be engaging more directly in nuclear arms control. But if it does, then the discussion would have to extend to the other nuclear weapon states as well. What would be the rational basis for including China, which is far smaller than the 2 giants, while not including France or the UK or China or Pakistan or India, or indeed the elephant in the room in these conversations, Israel as well. So there is a conversation to have there, and China could be an important and useful part of it. The challenge would be, can China come forward with a position, with a policy, which helps nuclear non-proliferation and nuclear arms control move forward, which maintains the momentum of reducing nuclear weapons worldwide? Or will it simply take a position of saying, we're not involved until your numbers come down? I very much hope that there is a positive, active diplomatic response to that challenge, because that, I think, is the way in which we can find our way towards a balance between cooperation and competition, which is survivable and feasible, allows us to get through this very difficult phase of global politics and come out somewhere better on the other side, as indeed also the post-pandemic economic recovery kicks in. So thank you very much for the opportunity. Back to you, moderator.
Спасибо большое.
Thank you. You have answered the question that I have asked you, and so very good considerations that you came out with. It's just wonderful because when I was going through the materials of the materials on China, the most recent information about China, I was reading through. I paid attention to the fact that a lot of attention is being paid to the economic new course of Chinese development that was adopted recently, and it was kind of a response to the trade war with Americans, and this new way of development, and the answer to the sanctions, possible or existing, and so it's kind of double circulation. I want to talk about it. So then the going domestic, developing a domestic market, the consumption inside. So they say that so 400 million people of middle income already. So it's growing. So out of 1.5, it's the 400 million middle class. Not bad. And it's growing. And then I wanted to ask our colleague Yan Xitong to speak on that. Or any other issue that you would deem about double circulation, domestic versus international consumption, so that China would reduce its dependence in some sectors of Chinese economy on other countries like chips from the United States or other high-tech things. So this to reduce this Chinese dependence on this high-tech stuff, and so then it has to do with the desire of China to establish its position in global politics, and talking about the prospects, so global governance, to strengthen its position, Chinese position. So how would you respond to my statement?
Moderator. Well, if we're talking about the dual circulations, and I think this is a really new China's strategy for dealing with the situation. The first is the pandemic, and COVID-19 has blocked and or in some way breached the global chain of supply. Second, to dealing with the situation initiated by Trump administration to decoupling technologically and economically and with China. So these two things make the global chain of supply can no longer continue or can no longer as reliable as before. So that's why China adopted a dual circulation to dealing with this. Chinese government actually expected the dual circulation can help the world or help the world economy to recover, but it's based on mainly based on the internal circulation. The Chinese government concerned the internal circulation can make Chinese economy to resume its energy, and then when Chinese economy becomes growing strongly, it will boom becomes an engine to drive the world economy, just like the panelists said before. And China already become the major partner of over 120 countries. So if the internal circulation can make Chinese economy booming, and that means it will export or spill beyond Chinese border and to drive the world economy to resume. Second, I want to say that, and about the topic of this panel, whether China need a global leadership. Actually, from my understanding, all major powers and have the leadership, but do not understand what it is. And global leadership includes two components. First is the power. All of the major powers want to have it, and they are power hungry. But leadership also means responsibility. But no country wants to undertake more responsibility for the world. And so that's why when Trump talking about no longer want to serve as the global leader, it means he does not want to undertake the global responsibility. It doesn't mean that he want to give up the global power. What do you mean responsibility? Responsibility means to provide public goods. And to provide global public goods, from my understanding, is beyond China's capability and also beyond the US capability. It's beyond the capability of any existing country on the earth. At this moment, and China and the Chinese economy only accounts for 17% of the global GDP, and the US accounts for 24%. And neither of them have the resources to provide that kind of public goods for the world, which the rest of the world needed or required. And meanwhile, both China and the United States are the largest CO2 emissioner. So what I mean is China and the US cannot provide a leadership on climate change at this moment. And the second point related to the global leadership is that China does not like Americans' global leadership, because Americans' leadership, no matter under the administration of Trump or Biden, is anti-China. Because of the special character, or I mean the anti-China character of Americans' global leadership, and China does not like it. But meanwhile, China also have no capability, no resources, and more important, China has no knowledge and experience to provide a global leadership for the world. In the last 100 years,
За последние 100 лет никогда Китай не был лидером. Сейчас, секунду.
Okay, so in the last 100 years, China never served as a global leader for a single day. So China did not understand what is global leadership. And so there's a kind of confusing between the national leadership and the global leadership. I was shocked by my current research. I found that in China, you cannot find any single book about the distinction between national leadership and global leadership. And most people confuse these two types of leaderships. They think leadership is the same, no matter national leadership and global leadership. Actually, national leadership is one in a hierarchical society, and the global leadership is in the anarchical society. They are totally different type of global leaderships. So in that way, from my understanding, currently I'm doing research, try to improve our knowledge about the distinction between the national and the international leadership, and to know what it means and international leadership. The last point is that at this moment, and no any country can provide global leadership. So the only possibility and for the world is to have a collective leadership. Unfortunately, and the US do not want to have a collective leadership with China. US may want to organize a leadership with someone else, but it's anti-China. From my understanding, as long as the US include China from the leadership, I doubt US is able to establish a global leadership. The same. And if China excludes the United States, it's also beyond China's capability to establish global leadership. So at this moment, no matter G2, G7, G20, BRICS, none of any international organization, including UN, cannot provide a global leadership. So it seems to me we need a new global leadership to establish a new global leadership for it. But this is a joint global leadership. At last, I will just wrap up my remarks. At this moment, I don't think China and the US is able to provide global leadership for the world, because they have to understand that global governance is so different from the national governance, and that they need a collective efforts to establish that. Actually, it's very possible China and the US cannot establish a G2 leadership they need more other major powers of participation for this collective leadership. Thank you.
Спасибо большое, господин Ян Цветер.
Thank you very much. Dear participants of our session, we only have little time left, and I suggest that all the participants have only 2 to 3 minutes to answer the question. Does China need global leadership? To comment on what we heard over this more than an hour. Mrs. Quinn, please, the floor is yours.
Sorry.
Вам адресовано.
Yes, to you, yes.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much.
3 minutes, you have 3 minutes.
I think the world needs a leadership, obviously. I fully agree with Professor Yan. I think after globalization, what the world expects is collective leadership, cooperative leadership, coordinated leadership. None of the powers, U.S., China, or any single power can perform the sufficient leadership for the world. So it's important that the China, U.S., and Russia and all these countries work out their differences. But I think U.S., as far as I could see, U.S. has great difficulties coming out of the cocoon of being the leader in the past. Its arrogance, its condescending approach invites lots of resistance here in China. Actually, I'm surprised that Robert said that U.S. wants a democratic world leadership, which is great. But U.S. leadership was not elected by the world. It's exactly the problem. The world leading, the way the world is led is not democratic. We would all support a democratic way of leading the world. And we would also hope the world politics is transparent. Now, obviously, it's not. So that's why the U.S. is bugging even its own allies. But I think it's going to be a long transformation from U.S. leadership, which is the leadership, a leadership of a small group of countries, to a wider leadership for the wider world. It takes years, takes time, but I'm not very pessimistic about the future. Secondly, for China, I think President Xi spoke about the need for communication with the world. I think what he meant was for China to be able to better engage the world. Now there are many problems about China. Many of you mentioned there are many concerns about China, which is based on insufficient information, first-hand information. I think China is a bit clumsy in terms of being able to explain why we do the things the way we do, why we say the things the way we say. I think China needs to learn to be better able to communicate with the world and then let the world understand China better. That is indeed a weakness on the part of China, and that's why the president is calling on us to improve the capabilities. And translation is also a problem. When he said 可爱 in Chinese, I don't think he meant lovable. We among us debated about how better translate what he said. I think he meant more about being attractive, because people are talking about fear of China, but he thinks it's not a good idea to be feared. We should be more attractive to the world. But there are many such translation problems. It's another area we need to work on. But fundamentally speaking, at this moment, many of the world rhetoric about China came first from other countries, other peoples, and China is very defensive, and that also that is not very helpful for China's image either. So, of course, China is not a perfect country. There are many problems, and we continue to reform ourselves. That means we admit that we are not perfect. We'll continue to reform and continue to improve. But we do hope that whether it's a good point or the weakness of China is understood fairly, not being unfairly or untruthfully described and believed in. And I think the pure figures does set alarm among us and for us to realize the need to better communicate with the world. Thank you.
Спасибо. Роберт. Роберт далее. Да.
Yes, Robert.
Thank you. I was in very strong agreement with almost everything that Professor Yan Xuetong said. I thought these were all very useful presentations. I wish we had more time to talk. But Professor Yan, in particular, said that global leadership has two features. One is power and one is responsibility. Dr. Kissinger's way of putting this is that the two features of any world order are power and legitimacy, that any system has to both have enforcement power but also be seen as, broadly speaking, fair and attractive. And I think that China has a problem with the legitimacy side of this precisely because when it reaches for global governance, it is trying to govern internationally precisely as it governs domestically. I think that I don't know if I'm twisting Professor Yan's words, but I think that is precisely the issue for China. And that this becomes a problem for China's legitimacy because while China says it doesn't want to change other countries' systems, and in the first instance that is true, it's not China's policy to change other countries' systems. Because it governs internationally as it governs domestically, China wants to have its prerogatives, its ambitions, its modes of governance accepted without obstacle and without objection. Without obstacle and without objection. And that becomes a real problem for China. As we saw, for example, last year when the UK's ambassador to China published an article on WeChat in China and was called in by the foreign ministry and told that it was inappropriate and this article was taken down. And she pointed out correctly that China's ambassador to the UK has freely published over 170 articles within the UK, in the Financial Times, as well as on Twitter, and has never been called in or slammed down. That's a real problem for China. And I would, if we get to this question of what is ka'ai, or attractive or lovable, as Xi Jinping describes, one of my fellow panelists made the right point. Is China willing to actually change any of its behaviors to be attractive? Xi Jinping seems to think that it is merely a problem of whether China's messaging and propaganda is interpreted correctly by foreigners. What can we say without changing? What can we say to convince the rest of the world that China's behavior is really okay and is good, but without a willingness to change? And so I think China is stuck in this transition between a desire for global governance that is seen as legitimate, but it wants to pursue that governance as it pursues it domestically, and much of the world rejects that model. So we are going to be in a very long transition, I agree, to a new, more multilateral system in which neither country, the United States or China, can have a decisive view, and it will become more multilateral. That's largely good. Just in closing, I would argue that the United States and China, two countries I care about very much, we're pretty equally arrogant. These are two equally arrogant countries. We just have very different styles for our arrogance. I don't think that either country has a monopoly on self-regard. Thank you.
Спасибо. Спасибо большое. Коллеги, кто хочет еще прокомментировать?
So, dear colleagues, do you have any more comments? Madam Ichikawa, is there anything you would like to tell us? To as a final words.
Time is very limited, and actually, Madame Huyin talked about the difficulty of translation. As a also non-English speaker, I tend to understand what she wished to say. On the other hand, Dr. Daly quite precisely summarized what I wished to say when I was talking about actions rather than rhetoric. He talked about the behavior, which might be the best way to describe what I wanted to say. But what I wish to stress is, as a country in the region and in the middle of all these competitions, we in Japan and many countries in the region wish to work together with both US and China, but in different ways. So we need to have, of course, cooperative relations, but we also make sure we speak out when we see the challenges to the norms and rules, and also kind of rule-based international order, which are under challenge. And you have probably a lot to say why you are challenging, but what we have been kind of benefiting under the international order and rules-based predictable international situation is certainly, I'm sure, we all need, whatever country we belong. So I'll stop here. Thank you so much.
Спасибо. Спасибо, коллеги.
Thank you very much, colleagues. Yeah, Mr. Smith, Dan Smith, is there anything you would like to add?
Briefly, I thought I would give my version of the question and answering it. Does China need global leadership? If we think about global leadership in the form in which I think some of us have been trying to imagine it as a new kind of cooperative way of working, then the answer to your question is that China needs global leadership of that form, in the same way as we all need global leadership of that form, whether we are a great power, a declining power, a middle or a small power. So that kind of global leadership would be a global common good, and the answer to the question is yes, we need it. So does China.
Спасибо. Господин Ян Ксюйтон.
Thank you, Mr. Yang Ksuetong.
Well, I just want to make 2 points responding to Bob's remarks. And the first is about the components of international leadership. And Bob said that Kissinger concerned there are 2 components. One is power, the other is legitimacy. Actually, I think there's a overlap, these 2 concepts. Legitimacy means accepted power. Power and accepted power, there's an overlap. We cannot use these 2 terms to define the components of power. From my understanding, to define the international leadership, leadership should be defined by power and responsibility. Responsibility means what he has done with the power. Power is an instrument, and he uses the power to do something, and actually he do something and for others. So we simplify the responsibility to public goods. Public goods means that others can benefit from what the leader does with his power. Okay, that's the first point. Second, and I don't think it's about what China want to, Chinese way to obtain the international leadership. From my understanding, and I don't think China has a very clear concept or clear mind about his policy for the global leadership. For instance, and very recently, Chinese leaders suggest that and we should adopt the strategy or the diplomacy or the stance on the equal footing. And equal footing, it means that search for equal relations. Well, actually, when everyone is equal, there's no leadership. Leadership is based on unequal relationship. Leaders and followers. Without followers, there's no leader. Without leaders, there's no follower, but they are not equal. If they are equal, they are mutually leaders to the other side, there's no leadership. So from my understanding, at this moment, China still want to obtain an equal position as major powers, or to get this position respected by the other major powers. So at this moment, I don't think China's policy toward the global leadership is very clear. Thank you.
Спасибо большое. Профессор Ломан.
Thank you very much, Professor Lomanov. Yeah, very often people use, people say that people is going through changes that we have not seen for centuries. We shall hardly consider that we are getting ready to the monopoly of leadership transfer from the US to China. Indeed, if unprecedented changes happen, then the global leadership will be different from the previous. It will allow many players, and the equality that Professor Yang mentioned very properly will happen. And this new shape of global leadership is necessary both for China and the whole world. In China, they have a very good proverb. It says that, a good definition, from the conceptual point of view, the theoretical and mental readiness for leadership, the China is making first steps. This is the definition of three components: together discuss, together build, and together use the results. If China is able to turn this wonderful concept into practice, then the role of the positive role in new global leadership and world order will be secured for China. And I remind you that the conference today has a name of a prominent, wonderful scientist, and Mr. Yevgeny Primakov, and in his concept, he gave priority to collaboration and cooperation between Russia, India, and China. Speaking about the global leadership, we cannot just speak about transfer of leadership from the US to China. This problem cannot be discussed without India, Russia, Brazil, without many other rising economies. And only in the case when we discuss together, design, build, and then ensure that all this new structure functions, so we need to do it this way. Dear colleagues, I would like to express my satisfaction with the discussion that we had. I believe it was very capturing, interesting, but in a nutshell, to wrap up, I want to say that we're happy that the positions are different. We heard many opinions, but everyone meant that the future leadership is a collective one. And I agree with Professor Lomanov, who actually quoted Professor Primakov, Yevgeny Primakov, who conceptualized the idea of polycentric world. And Yevgeny Primakov is not with us anymore for many years, but we still go back and quote his words and remember him. And I want to thank all the participants of this discussion, and I'm sure we shall keep collaborating with thank you. Arigato, сессия. Ladies and gentlemen, we invite you to a coffee break, and the next session on the global EU role and post-pandemic period will start at 6.